So would you, Jasmin, like to start by introducing yourself?
Okay, hi everybody. Refreshing to see people. I'm Jasmin Assulin. I work as a diversity and inclusion specialist. I've done D&I work for quite a long time. I also do anti-racist work in more on the grassroots level here in Finland. And currently I work at Wondershop. It's a gaming studio that is driving social equity and inclusion for kids and the youth. And here today representing Inclusive as a community member. Good to be here.
Good to have you. Hanna.
Thank you. So nice to be here today. It's so interesting topic, but also challenging. So hope we will have interesting discussion here today. So I'm Hanna. I'm the head of talent and culture in this company called Brella. We are a small tech growth company with almost 40 employees at the moment. And we operate in event industry. So we provide these virtual platforms for event organizers. And what comes to diversity and inclusion, we are in the very beginning of our journey here. So I feel that we're doing pretty okay on some areas. For example, we have very international team. I just counted that we have people from 15 different nationalities. So basically it means that every second employee, almost second employee represents a different nationality. So I think that's pretty cool. Although there's a lot of areas where we still have a lot of work to do. So yeah, in the beginning of journey, but we're going there.
Hanna.
Yes, so I'm Hanna Korbela, Inclusion and Diversity Lead for Accenture Finland and People Experience and Leadership Development Lead. And I'm a sociologist by heart, economist by my second education, and a developer by my first strength. And I'm really passionate about inclusion and diversity and also emotional intelligence. I want to bring EQ to work life.
Wow, you're a multi-talent, right?
Trying.
Yeah, thank you everybody for the introductions. And regarding themes of today, I've kind of tried to put 3 different themes here for the discussion for today. And we'll be starting from the kind of strategy aspect, because I think strategy is very essential whenever we're talking about a culture. So my first question would go for Hanna and Henna. So could you describe on how your company or your organization has implemented diversity and inclusion as part of your strategy? So maybe Henna first.
Yeah, I can start. Thanks. So inclusion and diversity is really embedded in everything that we do. In the strategy, it's starting from the top. So we are setting targets on the global leadership level. We're measuring our leaders, we're setting KPIs. Inclusion and diversity is one of the measures for all of our top leaders in addition to, traditional financial metrics like profitability. Then we have embedded inclusion and diversity, of course, into our core values, so that it's part of everything that we do. It's part of our leadership DNA, how we expect our leaders and everyone to behave. So we're setting the behaviors. It's part of the processes that we do, from performance reviews to promoting people. So it goes through all the layers of the organization.
Cool. Hanna.
So we're still not there. I feel that so far everything has happened quite naturally. I don't know how, but I think we are in a good phase at the moment. We have a very strong culture and we take our values quite seriously. So that has helped a lot. And I also believe that that's easier when the company is still quite small, that everyone knows each other and the communication is much easier in a smaller company. but I'm fully aware that when we grow, things can change. So we shouldn't take this as granted. So that's why I feel that now it's time to prepare for the future and build this kind of strong foundation for our future growth, and focus on these topics at this point. And what it means in practice, we have tried to, for example, increase the awareness. We have provided trainings, or at least Inclusive provided those trainings for us. And also we have tried to kind of re-evaluate from this kind of perspective, that if there's something we could do better. So these are kind of the first steps we're taking at this point.
Really cool, really cool. And then for Jasmin, because I mean, you've seen quite a few organizations, and probably like, hopefully they've been asking you, how should we implement, diversity and inclusion as part of our strategy? So what would be kind of your advice there? So how do you see that, diversity inclusion should be implemented as part of the company's strategy?
Yeah, well, I'm going to start ambitiously. Like Hanna said, it's like in an ideal situation, it would be like in your company's DNA. So it would cut through your whole organization, both internally and externally, meaning it will be embedded in your culture and your values, in your leadership, in your marketing and communications, in your product development, HR processes and practices, you name it. And I understand that that's like the ideal level, and you have to start somewhere. And maybe one good starting point is like starting by measuring the diversity, measuring the diversity to find out the more, like to understand the data, and then to understand the next steps of where you could get started. And I also want to underline that, like Hanna said, that at Accenture it starts from the top. It's important that the leadership truly backs diversity and inclusion, because if leadership doesn't stand behind it, it's hard to get things done.
Yeah, fully agreed on there. I mean, that's really interesting. You both talk about metrics. So maybe if we have time to go back here, I would really love to hear more about that. But yeah, what's really interesting, I mean, because I think we're having a really good setup here. So we're having a larger corporation represented here. Then we have a startup company who's already seen many phases, and then we have an expert organization who has seen the whole big picture, I would say. So my next question would go for Hanna. So since you've been a small company with few founders, and now you're 40 something, and I guess you're having maybe 10 positions open at the moment, or at least you used to have.
And only one HR, so
okay.
It's been busy.
Yeah, so I can imagine you're pretty busy at the moment. But how has your company culture evolved, like during these different sort of like maturity stages that you've experienced at Brella?
Yes, so at the moment we are 4 years old. So the company has definitely changed a lot during those years, how it should be. But I would say that especially in the past year, I think at the moment we have much more structure in the company. And by structure, I don't mean these heavy processes, but this good kind of structure that supports our daily lives. So that's definitely one thing. But also, Brella has decided to invest on some of these quite key admin roles in the past year. For example, HR and head of finance, they didn't have those roles before. So I think that's pretty great that the company invests those kind of roles in the very early phase. So that's why we have a lot of more resources to focus on topics like, for example, diversity and inclusion, that there is actually one dedicated person focusing on developing the culture.
Yeah, cool. And then, I mean, for Hanna, I mean, we've seen that Accenture is probably it is one of the leading companies in I mean, in large corporations in what it comes to, praising diversity inclusion and, really like, I would say, walking the talk, right? Could you describe a little bit, like, how has that like process actually, how has it happened? So basically, and sort of like, what I'm really interested in also is because you're a large company, you're a global company. So how has it transferred from the kind of global level to the local organization? Or like, could you kind of open that a little bit?
Yeah. And firstly, thank you so much for saying that. That really warmed my heart that we have succeeded in this journey. It's been definitely a journey, a marathon, not a sprint. So we've been working on inclusion and diversity topics for 30-something years, from the 90s already. As you mentioned, we're a global company, so it has started from the global level, from the USA and UK especially. So there, the work life when it comes to inclusion and diversity is already much more advanced than in the Nordic countries. So it started from there with some of the experiences of our leaders of underrepresented group, and how they felt, and they just wanted to do something about this. So it has started gradually. Of course, you can't do it with a big bang. You need to start step by step. So we have started segment by segment. So first we started with gender equality, and then along came pride, LGBT+, and other dimensions of diversity. Then we have also started gradually sort of area by area. So employee resource groups, women's networks, pride networks, other diversity networks, going through our internal processes, exactly setting the core values, the leadership values, so that it represents inclusion and diversity. So really building the journey like step by step. And then you asked, how has this transformed into Finland from the global level? So I'm actually super grateful for the global and being part of a global organization, because especially USA and UK being the leaders in I&D, they have really pushed us. I mean, they have demanded actions from us. In the Nordics, in Finland, we might believe that, we are already equal. I mean, we have the law behind us. Many things are excellent in our society. But then there's a lot of things in work life that we still need to improve. And we've been getting so many resources like reports, data, KPIs. Jasmin also mentioned, start with measuring. We've got help with that and also push for that. So with the support, with the push and with the support, we have been able to build this in Finland as well.
Nice.
Can I
just
add something? Like, when we talk about equality, equity, diversity, inclusion, often I also hear in Finland but we are already like so equal here in Finland, and I just want to underline that we still have a lot of forms of structural discrimination here in Finland. And we have a lot of like marginalized groups of people in our society, and of course these problems of our societies are also reflected in our organizations. So that's why sometimes I also hear people talking about, but do we have to underline our differences? And my answer is that as long as we have these structural problems that are reflected in our organizations as well, we have to be able to talk about it.
That's really good point. And feel free to interrupt me. I mean, like, if you have, this is what I wanted to say, just go ahead. But actually what you were saying was almost what I had my next question. So I mean, you mentioned already this, like, structural inclusion. And I guess, like, I would assume, like it is a fairly new topic for many of us. Could you walk us through on the topic, like, behavior inclusion versus the structural inclusion, and maybe what things should companies pay special attention into when it comes to building a culture?
Yeah. Well, it's really essential to understand both behavioral and structural inclusion. And by behavioral inclusion, well, it refers more to like building inclusivity like between people in our everyday actions and our interpersonal encounters. And that can happen, for example, through like learning about our biases, learning about our advantages, privileges, and then mitigating them in order to be more inclusive towards, for example, underrepresented groups or minorities, and also in order to be more empathetic. And that's very important. It's maybe an easier starting point because behavioral inclusion is more visible. But then structural inclusion, on the other hand, it refers more to like transforming the system itself in the organizations and really looking at the structures of the organizations, like for example, how is the decision-making power divided in the organization, and really looking at and reshaping the processes as well so that they are fair and equitable towards everyone, and that there would not be any like invisible barriers that keep people with different backgrounds from advancing, for example, in organizations. And maybe that's the thing that would be important, because it's easier to start with behavioral inclusion, like I said, because it's more visible. But on the longer run, if we want to make inclusion more sustainable, we need to really look into the structures, even though it's harder because they are more invisible. But we need to shape these processes to be more equitable.
So your advice would be that, I mean, it's not enough that you kind of like work on one aspect, but you need to work on like both at the same time.
That would be the ideal way.
Exactly. Yeah.
And can I just comment that that here I think the external partners like Inclusive and other experts can be really helpful. Like in the Nordics, we've used I&D experts to be there in our performance reviews, in our staffing meetings when we're discussing who's going to which project, because it's very difficult to see that, you know, from within yourself, what's happening in those discussions, how the decisions exactly are made.
Very good. Then I guess we move to the theme number 2 for today. And actually, you've been touching this theme already in quite a few of your kind of speeches there. So the theme for number 2 would be the values and the mission. And obviously, they're very tightly connected also to the strategy. Or they should be. What I would like to share about like Maria 01 is that now we're talking about mostly company culture. But Maria 01 is a community, and actually already quite a big community. So we're talking about 1,300 people as part of the network. And what we did actually last summer. So, I mean, in terms of our values, we didn't have it written anywhere. It was not explicit. I mean, obviously, in any organization, you have values, even though you don't write them down, and that comes from people's mind. They might, you know, differentiate. So therefore, it's very important at some point to actually state them down. So that's what we did last summer. And actually, we did an exercise together with one of our community member companies called the Inner Duel. And it was a really fantastic exercise, but something that we could include 1,300 people as part of the process, which I think was really fascinating because there was like a lot of insights, and then the system did just the kind of on a voting basis, like which were the main ones. Yeah, just wanted to, you know, share the kind of like community culture aspect there as well. But my question to you would be, well, this goes to Hanna and Hanna again, because we're touching more on the company. But could you describe what are your company's or organization's values?
Yeah, I can go. This is actually a really good test for HR.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we value this kind of growth mindset that people are always trying to like be the best version of themselves. Also, innovation is super important for us, and also collaboration, both among our employees and also with our customers. And then we have this thing called Brella spirit, which basically means that we believe in confidence without egos. So, yeah, those are kind of our values.
Thanks. Hanna.
Wow, beautiful said. Wonderful.
Thank you.
So as mentioned, inclusion and diversity is embedded in our core values. We have 6 core values, and one of them, respect for the individual, is especially linked to inclusion and diversity, because it of course means that we value each other as we are, take each other as we are with our unique strengths, and we also value the different ideas and perspectives that we have in our company. Then inclusion and diversity is also in our leadership DNA. So we have defined 5 behaviors for leaders and for all of us. And there we start with personalize in a truly human way. So that's exactly about the same topic. So, you know, personalizing your journey and allowing it for others as well. And truly human there is from our culture. So we want to build a truly human culture where everyone can be their best selves, their true version, every day, also at work.
And then, yeah, for Jasmin, I mean, hey, by the way, because I threw you into cold water, so I need to do it myself, right? So the values of Maria 01 is trust, collaboration, impact, and responsibility. So yeah, that's the outcome by the community of 1,300 people. Jasmin, you mentioned already the power distribution in organizations. How, based on your experience, how is that visible? Is it hidden? And what changes would need to be made in order to have more healthy organizations in the future?
Yeah, well, it can be visible and hidden as well. For example, if you have diversity in your employees, if you have a diverse pool of employees, but it's not anyhow reflected into the decision-making positions or in leadership management, of course, it's a sign of that structural inclusion is not taking place. And what I would like to see for this change is to move on from talking about equality, which is of course essentially important, but equality is more about treating everyone the same. But if we really want to build structural inclusion, we also need equity, which is more about giving people the tools that they need in order to succeed in their work and to like also advance in organizations and in their career. So more like support from leadership for example, underrepresented groups in order to build structural inclusion as well.
It's very interesting, very interesting. I mean, could you give like a bit more in depth, like maybe, you know, practical tip, maybe a sort of like a good example that you've seen that a company who has made a, you know, huge improvement on this. Is there anything like a practical tip would there be?
Practical tip.
No, I guess sorry, that's you know, I'm just thinking
do they have any practical?
I'm happy to share.
Oh, please do.
Yeah. So what we've done is, of course, you know, for example, employee resource groups like women's networks, like cultural awareness networks, LGBT networks, mental health networks, disability networks. So those could be one measure. Then organizing training for these groups and of course for the whole organization, mentoring, coaching specifically dedicated for them and leadership programs. Then it could be even related to rewards. So we even have this sort of dedicated budget. So if we see when we do rewards decisions, if we see that there's differences between majorities and minorities, we have a special budget where we can request additional rewards budget for these underrepresented groups if they are not treated equally.
Very good.
Thank you. All right, I guess it's time to move on to kind of last theme of this discussion. So the last theme for today is related to talent attraction, hiring, and also retention. Yeah, actually my first question would be like for all of you, if you could give like really short answers on this one, but how big of a role do you think like attracting talent and recruiting plays in building a diverse company culture? So maybe starting from Hanna.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I would say that it's super, super important. At the moment, I feel that our like diverse and inclusive culture we have at Brella, and also the fact that our working language is English, I would say that those two factors are definitely the biggest competitive advantage for us at the moment. So super important.
Yeah. Maybe Hanna?
Yeah, I also think that recruiting and the talent attraction are super important, because with that we are building the future of the company. We are spreading the message of our values, exactly as Jasmin said. You know, we want to, you know, show what kind of company we are already when people are applying, and do that throughout the process. But then on the other hand, I wouldn't put too much pressure on the new joiners, because of course it's very difficult for a person to try to transform the culture that already exists there. So very important, but then again, we need to work on the existing culture as well.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, that of course recruiting is essential, but if we fail to build an inclusive culture, the diverse talent that we will be able to recruit, we will not be able to keep the talent, we will not be able to retain the diverse talent if we fail to create inclusion.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Very good point. So the retention. Okay. Yeah, actually there's like, I had some thoughts regarding that, but I kind of missed that. So let's go back to my notes. So maybe Jasmin, could you share some insights, what like, you know, what the research shows, like in terms of the, you know, teams and companies, how do they perform? You know, that how does diversity inclusion has an impact on the performance?
Yeah, I think Hanna covered that very well with her data points in the beginning, but it has been researched for decades by organizational scientists, economists, demographics, sociologists. So like, then the research has shown that diversity and inclusivity, of course, improve creativity, innovation, decision making, problem solving. And if we think about it, it's quite natural, because if we want to solve complex problems, we need to have as many different viewpoints as possible in order to solve these problems in a sustainable way. And if you want to take a more look on the research and data, for example, Inclusive has a comprehensive data bank on their website. And yeah, of course, not always like the road to this problem solving, it's not always easy when you have a lot of diversity and diverse like backgrounds and a lot of like different angles, but it will be more sustainable in the longer run.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. And I also want to emphasize that of course, research shows that it has an impact on organizations and teams' performance. But I also want to underline that it's also like building inclusion and having diversity in your organization it's also the right thing to do. This is my personal touch in this, and yeah, of course, like the outcome and the impact comes from people's well-being. That comes from inclusion.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Hanna, because you know, we've already discussed that you do a lot of recruiting. So I would like to hear and ask you, how do you take diversity inclusion as part of your recruiting process, and how do you talk about like accountability during your recruiting process at Brella?
Yes, this is actually my favorite topic. Also very challenging. There's always a human aspect in recruiting, so that's why it's quite challenging. But we, at the moment, we're talking about this topic a lot and like trying to get better with that. We actually have few different kind of tools. How we try to increase the diversity and inclusion and during the hiring process. And one way is that we have this kind of quite collaborative hiring process, which means that in every step of the recruitment process, there is always at least 2 people participating. So all the decisions we make, they are not based on one person's opinion. So we kind of challenge each other all the time. People have these unconscious biases, so that's why it's better that there's more people involved. And what else? It's actually nice that you mentioned this accountability. It's quite powerful, actually, that all the time you have this feeling that I should be ready to like explain my decisions, that why did I choose this candidate over this one. So that's been quite powerful. Also, we have quite standardized hiring process, so we want to treat everyone quite equally. And in the future, we are trying to include these kind of skill tasks and problem-solving challenges and sales demos, so that the focus would be on the performance rather than on how well we clicked with the candidate. So different ways, but it's not always easy.
Thank you. And hey, maybe one really short additional, but how do you minimize the unconscious bias?
Well, the first step is that we discuss about it, like quite openly, that how do you feel, what would be your unconscious bias. And for example, when we are screening the applicants, we always try to focus on the actual, like, the backgrounds, like what have they done, like their experience. I'm kind of looking these keywords, that do they have international sales experience and things like that. So the names, the age, the gender, none of that matters. So that's one way.
Yeah, thank you. And then for Hanna, you discussed earlier like the evolution of your company culture, implementing diversity inclusion there, but maybe a bit more specific question there, and maybe this could have a sort of like recruiting angle there as well, but kind of to my understanding, you started the sort of 50-50 gender ratio practices maybe 3-4 years ago or so. How do you see these practices have evolved after that? And maybe could you give sort of some insights on maybe your like recruiting process as well?
Yeah. So some 3-4 years ago, our previous global managing director, Pierre Nanterme, set this very bold, clear target that we are 50-50 gender balanced by 2025. And I want to emphasize that that's a target. It's not a quota, so we don't have recruiting quotas, but we have targets. And of course, setting a clear target on the very top level like that has impacted, how do we trying to achieve that target? So it has meant that we really need to go regularly through our processes. Exactly how do we do recruiting? So setting the targets, then ensuring that in our process, we are attracting diverse workforce, that we are attracting also women, looking at our ads, how do we, speak to our candidates, what kind of images we use there. Like Hanna mentioned, looking at the recruiting process, so we also want to ensure that there's always diverse recruiters included in the interviews. We are looking at the data all the time. So weekly we are going through our recruiting reports and checking what's the balance there and taking actions if the targets are not met.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Yeah, that was actually my last question on my notes. We still have 1 or 2 minutes, so would you have anything in your mind that you would like to share before we wrap up and maybe continue the breakfast? Oh yeah, okay, perfect. So we'll move there. All right, so the question is, what are the most important KPIs when measuring diversity and inclusion? So a super quick answers, max 30 seconds. So who wants to start?
I can start. Well, first of all, it's quite challenging to measure IND in Finland due to GDPR. So we can basically measure age, nationality, and gender. I would love to measure many other aspects as well. So we can measure those. And then in addition, we can measure in employee surveys, how are employees feeling? Are you feeling included and appreciated as you are?
Thank you very much. We had another one, right? Okay, so the question was that what would be the advice for international people how to integrate in the Finnish job market? Jasmin.
Whew, that's a hard question because there are so many obstacles. Like, for example, it has been researched that if you have a foreign sounding name, your chances of even getting a job interview in the Finnish job market is increasingly higher. But maybe my advice would be to come to places and network, meet people and start building your networks because the system is not fair. So yeah, unfortunately, unfortunately the system is not fair, but maybe start by networking.
Yeah. Hanna.
Yeah, I totally agree with Jasmin. It's a very challenging situation at the moment, but it's been nice to see that there's a lot of discussion, for example, in LinkedIn at the moment about these topics, that people try to increase the awareness about this topic. So I think that's a good point.
Thank you both.
And one more question.
Uno más, okay.
And this one goes to Hanna. So does Accenture have feedback opportunities for job seekers to report inappropriate recruiting experiences or to express doubt or bias in the decision making?
Okay, so the question was, I read it because, yeah. So the question was, is there a feedback system in place for Accenture in order for people to report inappropriate recruiting experience? Hanna.
Thanks. Very good question. You can, of course, always report back to the recruiter, for example. I have to actually check if we have an external channel for reporting issues. We do have an internal channel for reporting any misconduct where you can do it anonymously.
Thank you. Was there more? No? Okay, that was Unamas. And I guess time is up. So thank you very much for everyone. So Jasmin, Hanna, thank you for joining the session. It was a pleasure moderating the discussion here today. And thank you everybody for attending the Maria 01 community breakfast there remotely and here on site as well. So hope to see you soon again. So thank you.